Hi, my name is Ets Haim Library, and I welcome all of you on behalf of Sephardic Heritage International in DC, or SHIN-DC, and with thanks to our partner on today's program, Bendigamos, Amsterdam. The Ets Haim Library in Amsterdam goes back over 400 years and owes its richness to its genesis from Iberian Jews in 1616. Its collected works comprise over 500 manuscripts dating back to 1282 and 30,000 printed works dating back to 1484, including works by philosopher Benedict Spinoza. In 2003, the Ets Haim collection was added to UNESCO's list of World Heritage items, and today the library and its curator, our special guest today, Heide Warncke, works to ensure that the knowledge stored between its pages is never lost again. A bit more about Heide. She just started writing a dissertation about the Hebrew printing industry in Amsterdam titled The Amsterdam Hebrew Printing Industry, 1627 to 1815, the impact of intellectual, economic, and religious developments on Hebrew printing. For today's program, Heide will focus on the Amsterdam Haggadah, created in 1695, and notable for its illustrations, which include one of the earliest printed maps of the Holy Land. She will also share other historic Haggadahs, as well as some of the library's crown jewels. Heide, over to you.
Thank you very much for this introduction. I will start by sharing my screen. And I hope that you are all able to see what I'm seeing now. First of all, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to tell you something about the collection of the library Ets Haim. It's an absolute pleasure to share some of the beauty of Ets Haim with you. I would love to see you all in person. Maybe it will be possible again one day, but this is a very good option. I will start by giving you some historical background on the history of the Portuguese congregation in Amsterdam and its school with the library Ets Haim. And of course, I will also show you some beautiful manuscripts and printed books that we have in our collection. And as we are close to Pesach, I will focus on the famous Amsterdam Haggadah and show you some other special Haggadot that we hold in our collection. First of all, this is the library Ets Haim. It means tree of life. And it is housed in the historical complex of the Portuguese Synagogue in Amsterdam, part of the Jewish cultural quarter. The synagogue is lit by candlelight. To this day, there's no electricity or heating. This is the Portuguese Synagogue. Well, the Portuguese congregation is a Sephardic congregation, Sfarad. I'm sure I don't have to tell you, but I will just in case. Sfarad is the Hebrew word for Spain, meaning the Jews from the Iberian Peninsula. And I will come back to the question why the congregation in Amsterdam is called Portuguese. Ets Haim was founded in 1616 by the first conversos to turn to Judaism in Amsterdam. And the conversos are the Jews that were forced to convert to Catholicism under the Inquisition in Spain and Portugal. A brief excursion to the Iberian Peninsula will tell a bit more about this community. Just bear in mind that this is history in a nutshell. There's so much more to tell about the history than I will be able to do today. In the early Middle Ages, the Jewish community in Spain and Portugal developed into the largest Jewish community in the world. When Muslim conquerors arrived from North Africa in 711, golden ages began for the Jews, a highly productive period for Jewish learning, literature, and culture. The Muslim rule lasted until about 492, but when in 1146 the Muslim Almohads arrived in Al-Andalus and forced Jews to convert to Islam, the golden ages and the flourishing Jewish culture had definitely come to an end. In a process that took centuries, the small Christian kingdoms in the north gradually regained the peninsula. In 1478, the Spanish Inquisition was established, which hit the Jews on the peninsula hard. Catholic rulers in 1492 forced the Jews in Spain to leave or to convert to Catholicism. Many Jews fled to Portugal in that year, but in 1497, the Jews in Portugal suffered the same fate. And that means that from 1498 on, there were no Jews left in Portugal or in Spain, and Jewish life on the peninsula had ceased to exist. Only conversos, converted Jews, remained. Why this long introduction? To understand the Amsterdam part of the history, it is important to realize that the Sephardic diaspora is divided into two parts, as there were two waves of expulsion. The first part is the group of Jews who in 1492 refused to convert and left Spain. They remained Jewish and therefore had a continuation of their Jewish tradition. They fled to the Ottoman Empire, North Africa, Portugal. And the second part is the group of Jews who stayed in Spain and were forced to convert in 1492 in Spain and in 1497 in Portugal. And they had a discontinuation of Jewish tradition. And that means that the communities that were built, for example, in Amsterdam, were built by conversos from scratch. When in 1536 the Inquisition was established in Portugal, many conversos went back to Spain, where they were called Portuguese Jews. Many integrated into Christian society, but others fled during the 16th and 17th century to Italy, Antwerp, Amsterdam. And because this group was called Portuguese Jews in Spain, they were also called Portuguese Jews, for example, in Amsterdam, but also in other places. There, also in Amsterdam, centers of Jewish life were built by conversos who didn't know anything or very little about their Jewish roots. So the first group that fled the Iberian Peninsula were Jews, and the second group, the people who came to Amsterdam, were conversos. The first refugees from the Iberian Peninsula arrived in Amsterdam shortly before the year 1600, and we know that from 1602 on, Jewish services were held in the private house of Jacob Tirado, who was one of the founders of the Spanish-Portuguese community of Amsterdam. And this is a Torah shield that Tirado and his wife gave to the Portuguese congregation in 1606. The story is that Tirado sailed with other conversos in a vessel from Portugal when the vessel was driven out of its course to the city of Emden in Friesland. There he met the Ashkenazic Rabbi Moses Uri Halevi, who gave him the advice to go to Amsterdam and helped him to establish the first congregation there. Tirado acquired a house on the Houtgracht in Amsterdam and transformed it into Amsterdam's first synagogue, which was called after him, Beit Yaakov. And this is an image that Romein de Hoge made around the year 1600, when the congregation had already moved to the newly built Esnoga, which we have seen that earlier was built in 1675. And the title of this copper engraving is The Former Jewish Church Beit Yaakov. Immediately, education was provided for the newcomers to close the gap of the many generations of conversos who knew little about their own Jewish tradition anymore. In 1616, a school was founded as part of the synagogue and was called Talmud Torah. And over time, the name Ets Haim became synonym for both and was used for the school Talmud Torah and the library Ets Haim.
I never did know your name.
The school Ets Haim was seen as unique in the Jewish world in the 17th century and impressed and moved many visitors, especially because of the excellent quality of the curriculum. Shabtai Stefter Horwitz, for example, who visited Ets Haim in the 17th century, was moved to tears of joy when he saw that the emphasis on teaching was on learning Torah first and on learning Mishnah and Talmud much later. And this was in contrast with other Jewish communities in Europe. Also, Hebrew grammar, didactic poetry, and rhetoric was taught, and much value was put on translating Hebrew text into Spanish. Also, the trivium, grammar, rhetoric, and logic, essential to the classical education, was part of the curriculum. And then in 1675, we've seen this slide before, the congregation, school, and library at Haim moved to the premises of the newly built synagogue, Portuguese Synagogue. As well as Hebrew books, the collection contains many Portuguese and Spanish manuscripts and printed works, as the Amsterdam Sephardic community long maintained its connection with the languages of the Iberian Peninsula. In general, Spanish was the language of literature, and Portuguese the language for everyday life and the administration of the congregation. Ladino was never spoken in the Portuguese congregation in Amsterdam, as it is the language of the first wave who fled as Jews. Since its foundation, Ets Haim has always employed a librarian, and by far the most influential of these was David Montesinos, who served the library for 50 years. I have a picture of him here. He is the one on your left side, and well, he was a curator or librarian for 50 years, and I like this picture very much. The reading room more or less looks the same now, but we don't have a stove, no open fire, and we don't have inkwells on the tables, which would be the nightmare of every curator in our days, but it wasn't in the 19th century, I guess. In 1889, David Montesinos decided to give his private collection, his private book collection, to Ets Haim. And today the library holds about 600 manuscripts and about 25,000 printed books, and is the oldest active Jewish library in the world, more than 400 years old. Life in the 17th century was very much centered around the religious community, the school of the congregation, and the library Ets Haim. And as a result, the collection of Ets Haim provides an excellent insight into the mind and daily life of the so-called new Jews. It is an outstanding reflection of the range of thought and ideas of this young community. I always say that every book that you take out of the shelves in Ets Haim tells you something about the congregation in the 17th century. Why did they read a specific book? Why did they want to learn a specific text? So it is a very, very interesting collection in that sense also. We also gain a very clear picture of the identity of the first Jews here. And it might come as no surprise that this identity has a distinctive Iberian nature, as they incorporated many Iberian traditions into their new surroundings. In terms of culture, the newcomers had an Iberian heritage, and this was very much cherished. This is visible in the choice of language, the writing style, the arts, and the subjects that were written about and given priority. And today, I will focus especially on the Amsterdam Haggadah, and I will show you a couple of other Haggadot that we hold. But to give you an idea of about the variety and range of the collection, I will first give you a quick tour, very quick tour of some highlights that we have. Most of my examples are manuscripts, but we also hold many special printed books, of course. So this is the first one. I want to show you, and this is an example of the skills of the master scribe Yehuda Maccabeo, which he wrote in 1650. This is an early prayer book in Portuguese that he copied in Brazil, Recife, and he took with him to Amsterdam. And this is a very nice, in my view, very good example of some Iberian traces when it comes to art, because the illustrations on the letters, for example, have a very Iberian feel to me. But we have many more examples, and also examples that are much clearer than this one in that sense. We also have a Quran in our collection, written in the 17th century. This is a Spanish translation of the Quran, and this is, of course, a unique item also. And also a Spanish translation of Praise of the Folly, Moriae Encomium, by the humanist Erasmus of Rotterdam, whose satirical essay was published for the first time in 1511. And this manuscript is the first known Spanish translation ever. And what makes this even more special is the fact that Praise of Folly was put on the index of the forbidden books by the Catholic Church in 1559. And reading books that were on the index was strictly forbidden and could lead to excommunication. So it's very interesting to do even more research. Some research has done, but even more research about this book that we hold in Ets Haim. Another beautiful example is this manuscript that you see on the bottom right of Moses Maimonides. And this is the oldest manuscript in our collection, the Mishneh Torah. It was copied in Narbonne, the south of France, which was also part of the Sephardic areas, so to speak, in 1282. And in it, we also find censorship by the Catholic Church, who had the manuscript in their possession in 1555 and in 1601. So as many books in our collections tell more than just what the context of the book is telling us, this is an example of a book that, if it could speak, would tell us a lot of stories, especially about the Inquisition. This book is something that you wouldn't expect in the library. The most important source of income for the Portuguese congregation in Amsterdam was trade, especially trade between Holland and Portugal and their colonies. The famous poet and historian of the congregation, David Franco Mendes, was also an insurance broker. And this dictionary of shipping terms in Dutch, Spanish, Portuguese, and French was his handbook. It was a handbook made by himself that he and his employees used in order to insure the different parts of ships. So should a ship be lost overseas somewhere, he would be able to name the parts in different languages. This man, some people might know him, is Menas ben Israel. And Menas ben Israel was the first Jewish printer of Hebrew in Amsterdam. And the quality of his Hebrew type made him even more famous in the Jewish world, in the whole world. He was born on Madeira or in Lisbon, that's not quite clear, in 1604. And his family arrived in Amsterdam in 1613. In 1622, when Manasseh was 18 years old, so very young, he became a rabbi of the congregation and a teacher of Talmud Torah. When the English queen, Henrietta Maria, visited the Portuguese synagogue, Manasseh wrote a welcoming speech and uttered the famous words about how the Jewish newcomers in Amsterdam felt. What he said then was, "We no longer think of Castile as our fatherland, but Holland." I'm sure that this was heartfelt and true, but I'm also convinced that the evidence in our library the Portuguese congregation in Amsterdam also kept a very outspoken Sephardic soul, Iberian soul and identity to this day actually is also true. So if it is possible to have more than one soul in yourself, I'm sure the Sephardic Jews in Amsterdam had two. This is a grammar written by Manasseh ben Israel when he was only 17 years old, and this grammar is copied by Manasseh's pupil Solomon de Oliveira in 1647. It was never printed, and as far as we know, only 3 manuscripts are kept of this beautiful grammar. And well, why is it in Portuguese? It also tells us that the newcomers in Amsterdam really had to learn Hebrew, and many of them learned Hebrew from Portuguese, which was their first language. Another example when we're talking about Manasseh ben Israel is this ketubah, marriage contract, which is signed by Manasseh ben Israel when he was rabbi of the congregation. I think I could speak an hour about this ketubah, and we don't have time for that, but I want to tell you that the little images around the ketubah really do reflect Portuguese life in Amsterdam, and you can see it on the image that I enlarged. For example, look at the top hats, which are very typical for Amsterdam. So when we are looking at the Amsterdam congregation, there has always been a great interest among the conversos in mystic tradition. Especially as a consequence of the expulsion, they began to search for signs of when the long-awaited Messiah would come to bring them to the Holy Land. And the year 1666 marks in a way the grand finale worldwide of the hope for the Messiah to come. And also here in Amsterdam, the whole city was thrown into commotion when news arrived that a man from Smyrna, that is Istanbul now, called himself the Messiah of the Jews. Here, people sold everything, including their houses, and they danced on the street because they believed that the end of their exile was near. The most remarkable manuscript in the collection and evidence of this commotion that the congregation was in is a letter that was written by 24 famous leaders of the Portuguese congregation in Amsterdam to hail Shabtai Tzvi as Messiah. The letter also says, where exactly are you, Shabtai Tzvi? Should we come to you, or are you coming to us? And this letter was definitely sent, but never reached Tzvi, as it became clear that he was not the Messiah. The Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, where Shabtai Tzvi was at that moment, Mehmed IV, was not that happy with a proclaimed Messiah in his empire, to say the least. He gave Tzvi the choice of shooting him with bow and arrow, and if he would survive this, that would be a miracle, and it would be clear that Shabtai Tzvi is indeed the Messiah, or to convert to Islam. As we all know, Tzvi converted to Islam, leaving his followers traumatized as a world broke down for the Jewish communities worldwide. Very few traces of this episode are found in Ets Haim, and there seems to be evidence that this unfortunate chapter was best forgotten. This letter, for example, had long been lost and only came back into the collection in 1933 when a German bookseller offered it to Ets Haim because he felt that it belonged there. In my view, the fact that it only came back into the collection in the 20th century saved it from the 17th century efforts to erase this piece of history. Let's now move to the beautiful Amsterdam Haggadah. We have this beautiful hand-colored Amsterdam Haggadah from 1695 in Ets Haim. And I will show you that the the messianic sentiments were far from over in Amsterdam. So this is it. And it also has a map of Eretz Yisrael in it. Hagadah means telling in Hebrew and commemorates the Israelites' exodus from Egypt. It is read during the Seder. The Haggadah in general is the book with the most illustrations in Jewish book history. You might ask yourself at this point, having the second commandment in mind, if the making of images was allowed, but there is a difference between 2 or 3-dimensional images. 3-dimensional graven images are not allowed according to the second commandment, and you are not supposed to worship a graven image, of course, but there is no problem with 2-dimensional images. The Amsterdam Haggadah was printed by an Ashkenazic printing house and addresses the Ashkenazic and Sephardic tradition. The instructions are both in Yiddish and Ladino. If we're talking about marketing, this is a very good marketing thing that they addressed both traditions and put it all into one book, into one Haggadah. The Venice Haggadah, for example, is completely different. The Venice Haggadah is earlier, and the Venice Haggadah came out in 3 editions, one in Yiddish, one with Ladino, and one with Italian with Hebrew letters. So very smart one to print this Amsterdam Haggadah with the 2 traditions in one book. In the past, woodcuts were used to illustrate the Haggadah, the Haggadot, and this, the Amsterdam Haggadah, was the first time that copper engravings were used. And so proud was the printer that he mentioned this on the title page, Geruda Luchot Nechoshet, printed with copper plates. And also here it is mentioned that this procedure was felt as the elevation of light above darkness. The makers saw in this new technique a fulfillment of the Talmudic concept of Chidur Mitzvah, beautification of the commandment. And there's also the shortened commentary of Abra Vanel's Chukata Pesach included. The 14 engravings, and we see here a few, not all the 14 engravings, but many, were made by Abraham Bar Jacob. And Abraham Bar Jacob was a priest who came to Amsterdam from the Rhineland, became an engraver, and converted to Judaism in 1689 in Amsterdam. The interesting thing is that his second wife was Deborah Probst, the sister of the famous Amsterdam printer Solomon ben Joseph Probst. And what is a bit of, well, I find it an interesting detail. It's not in the scale of things, but I find it interesting is that in 1712, Probst himself printed an edition of the Amsterdam Haggadah, but he erased the name of his brother-in-law from the title page. To say it mildly, it seems that Probst didn't like Bar Jacob that much. So Bar Jacob wasn't mentioned anymore a couple of years after he printed his the first Amsterdam Haggadah. Bar Jacob used the copper plates of Matthäus Merian the Elder of Basel that the latter had made for his Icones Biblicae and for his world history, the historical chronicle. Bar Jacob not just copied the engravings, he altered them and sometimes combined different images into one. You can see that that he altered. Now sometimes he didn't alter. You can see that on the image on the bottom right, where the 5 wise men of Bnei Barak are discussing the Exodus. And on our image, there are more than 5 men, because this is an image from the Icones Biblicae of the meal that Joseph offered to his brothers in Egypt. Another example is the image of the 4 sons, in which he combines 4 figures from different sources. During the Seder, the question, how is this night different from all other nights, is asked. by four basic types of children, each requiring its own type of answer: the wise, the wicked, the simple, and the son who does not know how to ask. Try to keep this image in mind, and I will show you now where the original images were taken from Merian's oeuvre. So this is our wise son from the Amsterdam Haggadah, and he is a mirror image of a figure in a scene from Merian's historical chronicle, in which Hannibal swears enmity against Rome. So you can see the figure of the wise son is mirrored. Then we get to the wicked son. The wicked son was a soldier from one of Merian's battle scenes. The simple son was taken from a mirror image of a figure of Samuel as he anoints Saul from the Icones Biblicae. And the son who does not know how to ask, this one, was again taken from the Hannibal scene. The Amsterdam Haggadah was so revolutionary in its sort that it influenced the topics of illustrations, composition, and layout of many printed Haggadot to this day. And especially in the 18th century, manuscript illustrations were influenced by the Amsterdam Haggadah, which is an interesting fact. I have an example here. So here we see the title page of our Amsterdam Haggadah. This is the title page of a manuscript, Haggadah manuscript, that is made by Nathan of Meseritz from Moravia in 1728. Very much alike, especially the figures of Moses and Aaron. I would say spot the difference. It is very much alike. I will show you another example. These are the four sons in the Amsterdam Haggadah. These are the four sons in the Leipnic Haggadah from 1734. Joseph ben David of Leipnic. In the 18th century, there was a kind of revival of Hebrew illuminated manuscripts, and he reinterpreted the Haggadah for his own time by depicting figures in 18th century European dress and surroundings. Look at the dresses, it's really beautiful. Then this is another image of our Nathan of Meseritz Haggadah, the four sons. And this is an exact copy of the Amsterdam Haggadah. By the way, the Leipnic Haggadah and the Meseritz Haggadah is held in the collection of the Jewish Historical Museum. Bar Jacob Judaized many Christian elements and gave them other meanings, sometimes messianic or esoteric ones. And traditionally, an image of the Messiah entering Jerusalem is part of every Haggadah. And in this one, it is not included, which is interesting in itself. Is this a reaction to the trauma of the false Messiah? We don't know. There are, however, two other images that allude to the Messiah. One is the large depiction of the temple based on Miriam's plate of Solomon's temple, placed next to the hymn Adirhu, which expresses hope that God will rebuild the temple speedily. Mighty One, build your house soon in our days. By placing the two parts next to each other, the hope that the temple will be rebuilt is visualized. By the way, in this image of the temple, in the 1695 Haggadah, a cross was placed by Merian on the location of the Church of the Final Judgment. You can see it here. I have to admit that it's difficult to see, but there is a cross, and Bar Jacob didn't erase this cross. We don't know why. Some scholars say that he left it on purpose. Other scholars say that he might have left it by accident. No one knows. And in later editions, this was sometimes replaced by the Star of David. Another perfect illustration of messianic ideas is to be found in the fold-out Hebrew map showing the Exodus from Egypt, the route of desert wandering and the Holy Land divided into tribes. And this map, which goes back to a map from 1590 by the Dutch mapmaker Christian Adrichem, also became the model for the earlier known map in Hebrew from 1621. So the map in the Amsterdam Haggadah is not the first Hebrew map ever. The first Hebrew map ever was also based on the same original, but printed in 1621. Our map is oriented eastward, the Mediterranean coast at the bottom, Damascus on the left, and Egypt on the right. You see the goddess of the Nile riding on a crocodile. Now let's look at the map in some detail, and I will put out some details with our laser point. We will start with this part of the map. This is a scroll with the 41 stations through which the Israelites journeyed on their 40 years march through the desert. No illustrator has ever done this before. The Bible tells us about 42 places, and it is not clear why Jacob chose to leave one out. We have no idea. This is not a map alone, but also mapping the messianic journey with all its stations for the future. Don Isaac Abravanel, 1437, and he died in 1508, already commented on this in his time, that the reason why in Bamidbar all the stations are repeated was to refer to the future redemption. And Jacob may have hinted that the map goes beyond the obvious and contains subtle meanings available only to those who study the map carefully. I want to show you another detail, and that is, where's my pointer here? This is Jonah and the whale. Another example of the composition that the engraver Bar Jacob chose for his map. It's a storm-tossed ship with two figures throwing Jonah into the mouth of a whale, and beneath it Jonah, who has miraculously been saved on land. The model of the ship is from the map of Adrichem, but Jonah, who was saved on land, is from Merian's image. The next detail I want to point out are these ships. You can see them here more closely. There seem to be some places with a hidden meaning, again reminding us of redemption. There are 4 sailing ships with 13 tugging rafts behind it, bound for the port of Jaffa. Above it, we don't see it on this slide, but you have to believe me, above it is the biblical verse, and I'll have the translation here. Rafts of the trees of Lebanon sent by Hiram, king of Tyre, on the sea of Jaffa, and Solomon had them brought up to Jerusalem. Do the number 4, so the 4 ships, and the number 13 have hidden meanings? And then we have the cows here, the detail of the cows here. Below the 4 ships are 4 cows, and below a compass with 4 directions. The number 4 is essential to the Passover, as it is related to the 4 expressions used in Exodus 6:6-7 to describe the deliverance of Israel. And I quote, "Say therefore to the people of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you," that is 1, "out from the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you that is two, from slavery to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great acts of judgment. I will take you, that is four, to be my people, and I will be your God. You shall know that I am the Lord, your God, who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. So the number 4 is very important. Another detail is this masonry bench here. Also Kabbalistic in terms of numerology, maybe. I'm very careful here. You might have noticed I'm not an expert on Kabbalah. Research has been done on the map of the Haggadah, and there are a lot of discussion about the details of this map. In the left bottom corner of the map on a masonry bench is a map scale in Persian parasangs, and a parasang is an old Persian measurement. It's about 6 kilometers, and Jacob uses Hebrew numbers on this scale on the right and increases towards the left. So he marked his scale beginning with Aleph and ended it abruptly at Kaf Het, 28. The number 28 is a meaningful word in Hebrew, meaning koach, power. And 28 is also the number of Hebrew letters in the very first words of Torah. So we're getting back to the map. The Amsterdam Haggadah was the first Haggadah to contain a map of the Holy Land. And why did Abraham Bar Jacob include it in his Haggadah? Well, commercial reasons could have been a factor. And of course, there was a connection with the story of the Haggadah. And in the caption of the map, I put down some errors here. And the caption of the map by Jacob gives us an insight into what might have been his reason to include it. This looks definitely messianic to me. Let me move to the next slide here. So this is the text above the map, and I have enlarged it. I will read it in translation. This is to make known to every understanding person the route of the 40 years journey in the desert and the breadth and length of the Holy Land, from the river of Egypt to the city of Damascus, and from the valley of Arnon to the great sea, and within it the territory of each of every tribe. And the Holy Land in Hebrew, I marked it in green here, says Ets Haim, which is a literal translation of the Christian expression Terra Sancta. And this is, as far as I know, found nowhere else in Hebrew literature, Ets Haim. Then, after the Ets Haim, you see two, with the next green line, you see two combined biblical citations. The first one is, it starts with, for the ones who can read Hebrew, Ka'asher enechem, and I will translate, so that your eyes will behold those things properly. And after that, Vehamaskidim, it starts with Vehamaskidim, and the wise ones will understand them. In the first, the year of publication, that is here, is given by dots above the Hebrew letters, something that is very common in Hebrew books, I'm sure you know, as all letters also have a numerical value. And here it is adding up to the Hebrew year 5455, which is 1695, the year that the Haggadah was printed. The second phrase, and the wise ones will understand them, this part, has to be viewed in context. And the context is that the prophet Daniel asked the angel, after he had the vision of the end of days, what will be the outcome of this? And the angel answers, the wise ones will understand. And will understand what? Will understand that this is the end of days. And this is another allusion to redemption. The other biblical phrase that can tell us more about Bar Jacob's reason for placing the map in the Haggadah can be found above the image of the eagle, and that is here. And I will also read it in translation. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to me. I very much like the this. It's al kanpei. It's the on eagle's wings, and this is. It looks very much like a depiction of the wings of the eagle. And this is another allusion to redemption. It is interesting that the map shows the tribes. Maybe this was done in the wake of the publication of Menasseh ben Israel's Esperanza de Israel, Hope of Israel, which came out with its vision of the rediscovery and restoration of the 10 lost tribes of Israel as a prelude to universal messianic age. And seeing the map will definitely have evoked with the reader the godly promise that he will lead the Jews to the Holy Land again. The map shows all that God has done to guide the Israelites from Egypt to the Holy Land, and the reader will therefore visualize that God could lead the Israelites from their exile again, for example, from Amsterdam. This gives a completely new dimension to this Haggadah, and it's fascinating to research further, and I would invite you to do that. I will now show you some other Haggadot very briefly that we have in our collection. We have about 100, so this is just a very small selection of other Haggadot that we hold. This one is printed in Livorno, Italy, in 1882 with Judeo-Arabic, and it has 78 detailed illustrations printed in green ink. Livorno was an old center for Sephardic life. At the end of the 18th century, the Hebrew printing presses in Venice declined and were replaced by the Livorno printers. And they had, as you can see here, their own style, typography, and title pages. And when it comes to Haggadot, their own iconography. And this we can see in how they depicted the plagues, for example, brought by some devil-like flying object. Don't know how to describe it otherwise. Working in a library is never boring. A while ago, I found something that has brought a smile on my face, and that is this Haggadah from the Netherlands, about the year 1900. This is a Dutch Haggadah, and I found it between some uncatalogued material. And what I like is that the mat is used as a bookmark, and it is probably and has been probably been in here for more than 100 years. We don't know. So always surprises. This is one of my favorite Haggadot. It's the Geisma Hagada, and it was published in Berlin, printed in Leipzig in 1928, and has illustrations by Otto Geisma. And what I like so much is that the scenes are depicted by very simple strokes, which have a very powerful impact. You can see the slavery here, the hard work, the Pharaoh here. So it is in its own right a very, very beautiful Haggadah. And this one is an example of one of several Yiddish translations of the Haggadah that appeared in Amsterdam in the second half of the 18th century. On the title page, the translator, Elchanan ben Moses, declares that such translation has never been seen before in the world, so that the common folk, be they man, wife, or children, know what to say. And the title page features a picture of 4 pillars with the names of the commentaries in the book. You see the pillars here. It also contains the Kabbalistic commentary of Rabbi Elchanan of Schneitach. Schneitach is in Bavaria. And in this edition, the word Jerusalem in the phrase next year in Jerusalem is replaced by Amsterdam. Maybe you've already seen it. You see it here. Le Shana Haba be Amsterdam. And these are the words with which I would like to end my presentation. This is not the last slide, but I have one more. I just hope to see you all in Amsterdam one day so that you can enjoy the beautiful collection. All our manuscripts are digitized and you can see them on our website. This is the website where you can see the manuscripts. The printed collections can be found here on WorldCat. However, the collection is not completely catalogued, as we are we are absolutely in need of funding to, and we hope that we will be able to continue cataloging, and then we'll have the complete catalog on WorldCat, but you will find part of it on WorldCat. And if all this made you curious to learn more about the library at Ets Haim and the many beautiful manuscripts and printed books there, please feel free to book a tour. After lockdown, I have to say, in Holland, we're still in lockdown, through the website of the Jewish Cultural Quarter whenever you're in Amsterdam, and it will be our pleasure to show you some beautiful treasures that we hold. Thank you very much, and Chag Sameach. Chag Pesach Sameach.
Thank you so much, Heidi. Chag Pesach Sameach. We have some questions from the audience.
Yes.
Let's see, the first question we have is from Mindy Reiser. What was the relationship between the congregation in Amsterdam and the diverse Jewish congregations in the Ottoman Empire? Were there visits, written communications, scholarly efforts?
Yes, that's the short answer. The long answer is that there, well, in the beginning, as I said, there was no Jewish tradition left for the conversos, so they had to get their information, their literature, their books from other sources, and those sources were the people, the rabbis, the learned men in the, for example, Ottoman Empire. So a lot of books came from Venice. There was no book printing in Amsterdam in the beginning. Book printing in Amsterdam started in 1627 with Manasseh ben Israel. So all the books that were Hebrew books that were read before that had to come from Venice or the Ottoman Empire, other centers of Jewish life. So there was a very strong connection to that other areas, also in terms of when there were certain conflicts, certain questions that the Parnasim, the board of the congregation in Amsterdam, didn't have answers to. They looked to the rabbis in Venice, for example, for solving those problems.
Thank you, Heidi. And we now have a question. We also have a question from Sarah Honan. Sarah wants to know, what are the requirements for you to accept a book or books?
That's a very good question, because I should say that in general, the collection historically is closed with the Second World War, because the school ceased to exist. The school of the congregation ceased to exist after the Second World War. So historically, the collection is closed. But some books got lost during the years, and so some books that have been in the collection at some point and are not there anymore, I would love to replace. So if there is a certain book that we had in the collection, we don't have it anymore, and someone could give it to us or sell it to us, I would like to replace that. The second thing is it should be very much, it should have a Sephardic connection and a very strong Amsterdam Sephardic connection. So if I feel that it is in the historic context, it fits in the historic context, I would accept it. So I hope that is an answer to your question.
Is there a particular title or manuscript that is in that category, that's something that you might be on the lookout for?
Oh, you want to have my wish list? Yeah, well,
top
yeah.
10, top 5.
10. Yeah, why not dream? I can't tell you the titles, but of course, Manasseh ben Israel is someone who I personally like very much, but not also. I mean, it's not a question of like or not like, but he played a very important role for the congregation, of course, as a rabbi and the first printer of Hebrew books in Amsterdam. So every Manasseh ben Israel book that we don't have in the collection would be very welcome, more than welcome, maybe. And well, I mean, the list can be very long. Yeah.
And someone wants to know if it's possible to purchase a copy of this Hagadah. I'm assuming they must mean the Amsterdam Haggadah.
A modern copy? Is that the question? If you can purchase a modern copy?
They don't specify, but I just want to know if it's possible to purchase a copy of.
I think you can always try to purchase the 1695 edition. I don't know, Sotheby's or Christie's might have it. I think, but I'm not quite sure. I think that the Amsterdam Haggadah is still printed to this day, but I'm not quite sure about that. Someone told me, but I never checked. So that would mean that you could acquire it, that you could buy it somewhere. What I didn't mention, maybe I mentioned, I'm not quite sure, that the Amsterdam Haggadah, the one that we have, is also special because it is hand colored. It has coloring in it. So usually, if you would buy the Haggadah, it doesn't have colors. It's as beautiful, but it's different.
And Sandra wants to know, can anyone visit this library online or in person? Do we need a reservation?
Yes. You need a reservation, and the general rule is that if you are a scholar, so anyone needs a reservation. That's important because different reasons, doesn't matter, but you need a reservation. Scholars can visit the library, can always visit the library, and if you are, well, I don't know how to say it otherwise, a tourist, if you just want to see it because you want to see it because it's beautiful, you can book a tour through our website.
And we have a truly international audience. We have someone here saying, thank you for a beautiful presentation, Rachel from Jerusalem. Thank you, Rachel, for the comments, and to everyone. And I think we have another question here. I guess take this as the last one. Mindy Reiser wants to know where people study Hebrew calligraphy and who are the masters of this.
Yeah, well, I have to think about that one. Well, in general, the calligraphy is something, or studying calligraphy is something that is within the scribe, the families of scribe. So if you study calligraphy, your son will, and his son will, and I mean, it's something that you have, a tradition that you will keep in the family. We know that from early scribes. When we're talking about Ets Haim, we're talking about a collection that is much younger. So we're talking about 17th century mainly. I'm not quite sure where they acquired the knowledge of the calligraphy. To be honest, I'm not quite sure about that one. But what I know is that many years after, I mean, we know that printing was possible from 1450 on. was invented in 1450, and we are talking about the 17th century Ets Haim in Amsterdam, that we have a lot of manuscripts in the collection that were written in the 17th century, in an age that it was possible to print. So the manuscript tradition was very much kept in Amsterdam, and we have some ideas why, but well, it is very obvious that there were very skilled scribes and calligraphers there. Where they learned that trade, I have no idea. I'm sorry.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Heidi. So I think that's pretty much the time that we have for today. Thank you for such a lovely experience of Ets Haim and its treasure. Also, thanks again to Bendigamos Amsterdam for partnering with Sephardic Heritage International in DC on such a lovely program just before Passover. Heidi, we hope to see you in person at Ets Haim when we're able. Our best wishes to you on a dissertation that would be a great resource to us. Also, thank you for your help with the manuscript that we needed for the S&P Festival back in February. Truly, my first visit to Ets Haim, a virtual one, has been so special and engaging. I feel more connected to the collection's 400 plus years of history, including its genesis from Iberian Jews in 1616. Heidi, we are most grateful to you for your work to ensure that the knowledge stored between its pages is never lost again. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. Stay safe and stay well.
תודה רבה.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Yes, nice to see everyone.
Hi allemaal.
Yeah, hello. Some
Yeah.
familiar faces.
Yeah, familiar faces, international audience. Very good.
Dag allemaal.
Hi, Renee. How are you doing?
Absolutely great. Great to have you here.
Great to see you. Hi, Nakshon.
Hi, Ephraim.
How are you?
I'm good. That was an excellent presentation. There was such a high quality.
Yes.
She's really an amazing scholar.
Yes, definitely. So we have to do more.